The foundation cracked the night she walked through their front door with mascara that hadn't moved and a story about helping her sister with groceries until 11:30. Caspian Vale knew his wife's face better than the blueprints he drew for a living. He knew when she was genuinely tired and when she was performing tired. This was a performance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya dropped her designer handbag on the granite counter with the weight of someone who had rehearsed casual. The sound echoed through their open-concept kitchen like a judgment. Caspian looked up from his laptop where he'd been reviewing construction schedules, the blue light casting shadows under his eyes. "How's Emma doing?" he asked, referring to the sister who supposedly needed late-night grocery assistance. "Oh, you know Emma," Maya replied, already moving toward the wine fridge. "Crisis management is her specialty." Caspian closed the laptop with deliberate slowness. Emma lived in Portland. Maya had been 30 minutes across town at a wine bar called Meridian, according to the location services he'd accidentally glimpsed when she'd asked him to check the weather on her phone earlier that week. He hadn't mentioned it then, he wasn't mentioning it now, but the information sat in his chest like a splinter. "Did you get everything sorted out?" he asked, watching her pour Pinot Grigio into a glass she definitely didn't need. "Mostly." Maya's voice had that airy quality she used when she wanted conversations to end quickly. "She'll figure it out." The refrigerator hummed. The dishwasher cycled through its final rinse. Their house, all clean lines and carefully chosen fixtures, felt like a showroom where two people happened to sleep. "I'm heading up," Caspian said, gathering his things. "Already? It's barely midnight." "Site inspection at 7. Maya nodded without looking at him, already scrolling through her phone with the intensity of someone reading emergency dispatch reports. The screen illuminated her face in harsh white light, and for a moment she looked like a stranger wearing his wife's expensive skincare routine. The thing about being an architect is that you learn to notice when foundations don't align. Caspian had built his career on reading structural integrity, on identifying stress points before they became catastrophic failures. By February, he was applying those same skills to his marriage. Maya had developed new habits. She charged her phone face down on the bathroom counter while she showered. She started buying coffee from a place across town instead of the shop 2 blocks from her marketing firm. She mentioned coworkers he'd never heard of with the familiarity of someone who'd known them for years. "How was the team meeting?" Caspian asked one Thursday evening as Maya kicked off heels that cost more than most people's monthly car payments. "Exhausting. Brandon's pushing this rebrand that makes no sense, and Sophia keeps enabling his worst ideas." Brandon and Sophia. New names in a vocabulary that used to include only Jennifer, the account manager, and old Mr. Hendricks, who ran the family business like it was still 1987. Caspian made mental notes the way other people made grocery lists. "What kind of rebrand?" he asked, genuinely curious about the work that supposedly consumed 60 hours of her week. Maya paused, wine glass halfway to her lips. "Nothing you'd find interesting. Corporate nonsense." 6 months ago, Maya could talk for an hour about font psychology and color theory. She'd sketched logo concepts on napkins at dinner, explaining why serif fonts convey trustworthiness while sans serif suggested innovation. Now her work had become corporate nonsense, too boring to discuss. The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in chemical baths. Late meetings that ended after the restaurants closed. Weekend strategy sessions that required designer outfits. Team dinners at establishments that apparently didn't allow spouses, even when spouses offered to pick up the check. "I should meet this Brandon character," Caspian suggested one evening while they loaded the dishwasher with the mechanical efficiency of 2 people sharing a chore rather than a life. "Why?" Maya's response came too quickly, like she'd been waiting for exactly this suggestion. "Curiosity. He seems to have strong opinions about your industry." "He's not really the social type. Very focused. Workaholic." Caspian rinsed a plate that was already clean. "Sounds like my kind of person." "Trust me, you'd be bored within 5 minutes." The conversation died there, but the question marks multiplied. Maya had never protected him from boring people before. Their social circle included Carl, who collected vintage spoons, and Denise, who could turn any topic into a discussion about her thyroid condition. If Maya was suddenly concerned about Caspian's entertainment threshold, something had shifted. He started paying attention to details he'd previously classified as background noise. Maya's phone buzzed with notifications during their rare dinner conversations, and she'd glance at the screen with a micro-expression he couldn't decode. Not quite guilt, not quite excitement, but something in between. Something that made her eyes brighten for half a second before she remembered he was watching. Work chat, she'd explain, but her thumbs would move across the screen with the fluidity of someone composing poetry, not discussing quarterly projections. Caspian had designed their home office with built-in charging stations and cable management systems that kept technology organized and accessible. Maya had started taking her laptop to the bedroom, claiming the natural light helped her concentrate. When he'd offered to install better lighting in the office, she deflected with jokes about his need to engineer solutions that didn't exist. But problems did exist. They were multiplying like hairline cracks in concrete, spreading slowly but inevitably towards structural compromise. The morning he found the receipt changed everything. It wasn't that he'd been searching through her purse. The strap had caught on the car door handle, spilling contents across their garage floor. Lip gloss, breath mints, business cards, and a dinner receipt from Enzo's, the Italian place downtown that required reservations weeks in advance. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, 2 desserts. Date stamped 3 days earlier, when Maya had supposedly been at a client presentation that ran late. Caspian knelt on the concrete floor, holding the slip of paper that itemized his wife's evening with mathematical precision. $47.18, plus a 20% tip calculated on an amount that suggested someone wanted to make a good impression. He could have confronted her immediately, could have walked into the kitchen where she stood sipping coffee from the mug he'd bought her in Prague and asked directly about her dinner companion and why she'd needed to lie about her whereabouts. Instead, he folded the receipt into his wallet and decided to pay attention more systematically. Architecture had taught him that the most dangerous structural problems were often invisible to casual observation. You had to know where to look, what signs indicated deeper issues. Marriages, apparently, followed similar principles. Maya's patterns became readable once he stopped making excuses for them. She left early on Wednesdays, claiming breakfast meetings with potential clients. She stayed late on Fridays, citing deadline pressures that never seemed to resolve. Her weekend errands took progressively longer, requiring multiple stops at locations she described in vague geographical terms. "I need to run to that place near the university," she'd say, car keys already in hand. "Which place?" "You know, the shop with the imported chocolates Emma likes." Caspian knew the university district well. He'd designed a mixed-use development there 2 years earlier. There was no specialty chocolate shop within 6 blocks of campus. There was, however, a boutique hotel with a lobby bar that featured craft cocktails and discreetly spaced seating arrangements. The knowledge accumulated like water behind a dam. Each small deception added weight to the growing collection of inconsistencies. Maya mentioned grabbing lunch with college friends who lived in other states. She referenced movies she'd supposedly seen alone that were only playing at theaters across town. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. She developed strong opinions about restaurants in neighborhoods she claimed never to visit. "How was your day?" became a question Caspian asked with genuine curiosity. Not because he cared about her well-being, but because he wanted to understand the complexity of the fiction she was constructing. "Crazy busy," was her standard response. This industry never slows down. Maya worked in marketing for a mid-sized firm that specialized in healthcare communications. Before Brandon and Sophia entered her vocabulary, she'd described her days with specific complaints and modest victories. Client X had approved their proposal. The creative team had finally nailed the concept for a campaign targeting new mothers. Mr. Hendricks had agreed to update their presentation software from something that belonged in a museum. Now her work had become mysteriously intense and impossibly demanding, requiring constant attention and irregular hours that made planning anything together an exercise in frustration. "Want a book that weekend in Napa we talked about?" Caspian asked one evening in March. "I wish I could, but this project timeline is insane. Maybe after we launch." "When's the launch?" Maya's pause lasted just long enough to be noticeable. "Tentatively June. Could be earlier if everything goes smoothly." Tentatively June became definitely July, then possibly August. The project that demanded every weekend and most evenings remained perpetually on the verge of completion, like a highway construction zone that existed in permanent status rather than progressing toward resolution. Caspian stopped asking about weekend getaways. He stopped suggesting dinner reservations. He stopped expecting Maya to be available for the kind of spontaneous plans that had once defined their relationship. Instead, he started making his own plans with the deliberate care of someone who was no longer willing to organize his life around someone else's fiction. He joined a climbing gym. He accepted invitations to professional conferences he'd previously declined. He started cooking elaborate meals for one, freezing portions for the nights Maya worked late, which had become most nights. Their house developed zones of occupation. Maya claimed the bedroom for her evening phone calls, speaking in low tones about urgent matters that required privacy. Caspian set up his drafting table in the guest room, spreading blueprints across surfaces that no longer needed to accommodate anyone else's schedule. They moved around each other like roommates who'd signed a lease they couldn't break, polite but distant, functional but not connected. Maya would emerge from her bedroom office to find Caspian reading in the living room, and she'd offer to make tea with the enthusiasm of someone fulfilling a social obligation. "How's the Davidson project coming along?" she'd ask, referencing work he'd finished 2 months earlier. "Wrapped up in January," he'd remind her. "Right, of course, I lose track sometimes." Losing track had become Maya's specialty. She forgot conversations they'd had the previous week. She double-booked their anniversary dinner, claiming a client emergency that couldn't wait. She started referring to mutual friends with the kind of detachment that suggested she was cataloging people she didn't expect to see again. "Did Sarah ever reschedule that dinner party?" she asked one Sunday morning. "Last weekend, you said you had food poisoning." Maya blinked twice, processing information that should have been immediately accessible. "Oh, right. How was it?" "Fine. They asked about you." "That's nice." The conversation ended there, but Caspian filed the exchange away with all the others that revealed how completely Maya had mentally exited their shared social ecosystem. She was physically present in their home, financially committed to their mortgage, legally bound by their marriage certificate, but emotionally she was living somewhere else entirely. The realization should have been devastating. Instead, it felt like solving a complex engineering problem. All the variables finally aligned. The structural integrity of their relationship had been compromised beyond repair, and pretending otherwise was just postponing the inevitable collapse. Caspian began making preparations with the methodical approach he brought to all major projects. He organized financial documents. He researched divorce attorneys. He started sleeping in the guest room, claiming back problems that were actually emotional clarity. Maya didn't seem to notice the change in sleeping arrangements, or, if she did, she was relieved not to have to perform marital intimacy for an audience that was no longer buying the show. Their house became a place where two people happened to store their belongings and occasionally crossed paths in hallways. They shared a mortgage and a mailing address, but they'd stopped sharing anything that mattered weeks ago. Caspian's breaking point arrived on a Thursday evening in April. He'd spent the day reviewing elevation drawings for a residential complex, working with precise measurements and calculated angles that would determine whether families would feel comfortable in spaces he was designing. He came home to find Maya pacing the kitchen while talking on the phone, gesturing with the kind of animated energy she hadn't displayed in their conversations for months. I know, but that's what makes it exciting," she was saying, laugh lines creasing around her eyes in expressions he remembered from their early dating years. She noticed him and held up one finger, the universal gesture for "this important call takes priority over acknowledging your existence." Caspian nodded and moved toward the refrigerator, not because he was hungry, but because it gave him something to do while Maya finished her conversation with someone who apparently deserved her genuine enthusiasm. "Okay, I have to run, but we'll pick this up tomorrow," Maya said, voice dropping to the register she once reserved for telling him she loved him. She ended the call and immediately began scrolling through other messages, her attention already shifting to the next urgent communication that required her full focus. "How was your day?" Caspian asked, the question now carrying weight it hadn't held 6 months earlier. "Hectic," Maya replied without looking up. "This campaign is going to be the death of me." "Which campaign?" Another pause, another calculation. "The hospital network rebrand. I told you about it." Caspian couldn't recall any mention of hospitals, networks, or rebrands, but Maya's certainty suggested the conversation had happened in some alternate timeline where they still shared details about their respective work lives. "Right," he said, closing the refrigerator without removing anything. "I'm going to grab dinner with Marcus. Don't wait up." "Sounds good," Maya replied, already typing what appeared to be a novel-length response to whoever commanded her evening attention. Caspian collected his keys and wallet, pausing at the threshold between their kitchen and garage. Maya remained absorbed in her phone, completely unaware that her husband was leaving or that he'd offered information about his plans for the first time in weeks. He stood there for 30 seconds, waiting to see if she'd look up, ask where he was going, or show any indication that his presence or absence registered on her emotional radar. She didn't. Caspian started his truck and backed out of their driveway, noting that Maya hadn't moved from her position at the kitchen counter. Through the window, he could see her silhouette illuminated by phone screen light, fingers moving across glass with the dedication of someone composing something important for someone who mattered. The drive to Marcus's house took 12 minutes. 12 minutes of considering whether his marriage was worth fighting for or whether it had already ended without either party filing the paperwork. By the time he reached his destination, Caspian had his answer. Marcus lived in a craftsman bungalow that he'd been renovating for the better part of a decade, approaching each room with the patience of someone who understood that good work couldn't be rushed. Caspian found him in the kitchen, standing over a cast-iron skillet that smelled like garlic and possibility. "You look like hell," Marcus said without turning around. "Grab a beer." "That obvious?" "Your text said you needed to talk. You never need to talk." Marcus flipped whatever he was cooking with the precision of someone who'd learned that most problems could be solved with proper heat management. "Maya?" Caspian twisted the cap off a beer he didn't particularly want. "Maya." Cheating? The word hung in the air between them like smoke from the skillet. Caspian had been avoiding that particular term for weeks, preferring euphemisms that carried less weight. Emotional distance, communication breakdown, growing apart. All the clinical language people used when they weren't ready to name the obvious. Caspian stopped asking about weekend gotaways. He stopped suggesting dinner reservations. He stopped expecting Maya to be available for the kind of spontaneous plans that had once defined their relationship. Instead, he started making his own plans with the deliberate care of someone who was no longer willing to organize his life around someone else's fiction. He joined a climbing gym. He accepted invitations to professional conferences he'd previously declined. He started cooking elaborate meals for one, freezing portions for the nights Maya worked late, which had become most nights. Their house developed zones of occupation. Maya claimed the bedroom for her evening phone calls, speaking in low tones about urgent matters that required privacy. Caspian set up his drafting table in the guest room, spreading blueprints across surfaces that no longer needed to accommodate anyone else's schedule. They moved around each other like roommates who'd signed a lease they couldn't break, polite but distant, functional but not connected. Maya would emerge from her bedroom office to find Caspian reading in the living room, and she'd offer to make tea with the enthusiasm of someone fulfilling a social obligation. "How's the Davidson project coming along?" she'd ask, referencing work he'd finished 2 months earlier. Wrapped up in January, he'd remind her. Right. Probably. Marcus turned off the heat and faced him directly. They'd been friends since college, had served as each other's best man, had navigated career changes and family deaths, and the particular challenges that came with being married to women who deserved better than their respective emotional limitations. Marcus had earned the right to ask direct questions. You sure? Sure enough. Evidence? Patterns, receipts, stories that don't add up. Caspian took a drink he didn't taste. She's living a different life and pretending I'm still part of it. Marcus nodded once, the gesture carrying years of understanding about the ways marriages could dissolve without anyone signing papers. What are you going to do? That's what I'm trying to figure out. They ate Marcus's improvised pasta while Caspian laid out the evidence he'd been collecting like a prosecutor building a case. The dinner receipts from restaurants Maya claimed never to visit. The new vocabulary of coworkers who existed in her stories but nowhere in her previous professional life. The phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered rooms. The weekend errands that took progressively longer and yielded progressively fewer actual errands. She's not even trying to hide it well, Caspian concluded. It's like she wants me to know but doesn't want to be the one to say it. Maybe she does. Want me to know? Want out but doesn't want to be the villain. Marcus refilled their drinks with the automatic gesture of someone facilitating difficult conversations. Some people need to be caught. Gives them permission to stop pretending. The possibility hadn't occurred to Caspian, but it made sense with the particular kind of sense that only emerged after months of confusion. Maya wasn't being careless with her deception. She was being careless with their marriage. The lies were so transparent they felt intentional, like breadcrumbs leading toward an inevitable conclusion. So, what's the play? Marcus asked. I don't know yet. You could confront her directly. And then what? She admits it, we fight, we separate, I move out, and she gets the house while I start over in some apartment that smells like other people's cooking? Caspian shook his head. I built that house. I chose every fixture, every paint color, every piece of trim work. I'm not walking away from it. So, make her walk away. How? Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering the question with the methodical approach he brought to his renovation projects. You set boundaries, real ones. Make it clear what the rules are, and when she breaks them, you enforce consequences. Like what? Financial boundaries, social boundaries, access boundaries. Make her choose between her double life and her marriage. Don't give her the option of having both. The strategy appealed to Caspian's engineering mindset. Clear parameters, measurable outcomes, action items that could be implemented systematically rather than emotionally. They spent the next 2 hours developing what Marcus called the framework. Separate bank accounts, shared expenses limited to mortgage, utilities, and groceries, individual responsibility for personal entertainment, dining out, and the kind of activities that apparently required expensive outfits and carefully crafted alibis. She'll call you controlling, Marcus warned. She can call me whatever she wants. I'm not funding someone else's dating life. What about social situations? What about them? You two are going to end up at parties together, friend gatherings, work events. She's going to expect you to play the happy husband while she flirts with whoever she's been seeing. Caspian hadn't considered the performance aspect of separation. Maya would want to maintain appearances until she was ready to make her exit official. She'd expect him to provide social cover while she transitioned from their marriage to whatever relationship she was constructing in her spare time. I stopped playing along, he decided. If she wants to pretend we're fine, she can do it alone. That's going to get messy. It's already messy. I'm just going to stop cleaning up after it. Caspian drove home with the clarity that came from having a plan. Maya's car was in the driveway, but the house was dark except for the bedroom windows where she was presumably continuing her evening communications with whoever required her undivided attention. He let himself in quietly and moved through their shared spaces with the awareness that they wouldn't be shared much longer. The living room furniture they'd selected together. The kitchen island where they'd eaten breakfast every morning for 3 years. The hallway gallery of photographs documenting trips and celebrations and the accumulated moments that had seemed significant when they were happening. All of it would need to be divided or abandoned or replaced. Their marriage had become a business partnership that was about to be dissolved, and every shared possession would require negotiation. Caspian spent the weekend implementing Phase 1 of his framework. He opened individual checking and savings accounts, transferring his direct deposits and automated bill payments. He calculated Maya's share of fixed household expenses and drafted an email explaining the new financial arrangement. Maya read the message Monday morning while she drank coffee from the Prague mug, her expression shifting from confusion to irritation to something approaching respect. "You're really doing this," she said. "I'm really doing this. It seems extreme. It seems necessary." She set down the mug with deliberate care, the kind of controlled movement people used when they wanted to break something but couldn't afford the satisfaction. "I don't understand why you're punishing me for working hard." "I'm not punishing you for working hard. I'm refusing to subsidize activities that aren't work." "What activities?" Caspian had prepared for this question. The activities that require designer dresses and specialty restaurants and the kind of scheduling flexibility that doesn't actually exist in your industry. Maya's eyes narrowed. "You've been tracking my spending?" "I've been paying attention to our spending. There's a difference. This is about control. This is about honesty." They stared at each other across their granite kitchen island, both of them understanding that the conversation was about more than banking arrangements. Maya was being forced to choose between transparency and independence. Caspian was choosing self-respect over willful ignorance. "Fine," Maya said finally. "If you want to play house like we're roommates, we can play house like we're roommates." "Good. I'm glad we understand each other." Maya left for work without saying goodbye, and Caspian felt the particular satisfaction that came from executing a plan exactly as designed. The financial boundary was established. Maya would either explain her expenses or fund them independently. She chose independence. Within a week, Maya had set up her own accounts and subscribed to a clothing rental service that allowed her to maintain her elevated wardrobe without maintaining a paper trail. She started bringing home takeout for one, eating at the kitchen counter while scrolling through her phone with the focused attention of someone reading important correspondence. Their conversations became transactional. Who would handle the lawn service? When was the HOA meeting? Did they need to coordinate schedules for the appliance repair appointment? Caspian found the new dynamic preferable to the previous months of manufactured intimacy. Maya was no longer pretending to be interested in his work or his opinions or his plans for their shared future. She was being honest about her disengagement, which felt like the first genuine thing she'd offered him since Christmas. But honesty, it turned out, had limits. 3 weeks into their roommate arrangement, Caspian came home early from a site meeting to find Maya standing in their bedroom talking on speakerphone while she sorted through jewelry options. "The blue dress or the black dress?" she was asking someone whose voice Caspian didn't recognize. "Depends on the venue," came the response. Male voice, confident tone, the kind of casual familiarity that suggested this wasn't their first conversation about Maya's wardrobe choices. "It's that place with the outdoor terrace, you know, where we went for your birthday." Caspian stood in the hallway, listening to his wife plan an evening with someone who had birthday preferences and strong opinions about color coordination. Someone who knew Maya's style well enough to provide wardrobe consultation. Someone who was clearly not a coworker discussing quarterly projections. "Blue," the voice decided. "Definitely blue. It matches your eyes." Maya laughed, the sound carrying warmth Caspian hadn't heard in months. "You're just saying that because you picked out the blue dress. I have excellent taste. You have expensive taste. Same thing." Caspian cleared his throat and walked into the bedroom with the deliberate footsteps of someone announcing their presence. Maya spun around, phone clutched against her chest like she was protecting state secrets. "I have to go," she said into the device. "I'll call you back." "Everything okay?" the voice asked, concern bleeding through the speaker. "Fine, just fine. Talk later." Maya ended the call and faced Caspian with the kind of defiant expression people wore when they'd been caught but weren't planning to apologize. "Work call?" he asked. "Personal call." "I noticed." "Did you need something?" Caspian looked around the bedroom they'd shared for 3 years, noting the open jewelry box and the 2 dresses laid out on the bed like evidence in a trial he wasn't supposed to witness. Maya was preparing for a date with someone who bought her clothes and remembered her eye color and had strong opinions about restaurant terraces. "I needed to change clothes," he said, "but I can wait until you're done getting ready." "Getting ready for what?" "Whatever you're getting ready for." Maya's jaw tightened. "I have dinner plans." "With your blue dress consultant?" "With a friend." "The kind of friend who picks out your jewelry?" "The kind of friend who has opinions about fashion." Caspian nodded slowly, filing away the information with all the other details he'd been collecting. Maya had moved beyond emotional infidelity into the kind of relationship that included shopping trips and birthday celebrations and evening plans that required wardrobe consultations. "Have fun," he said. Maya blinked twice, processing his response. She'd been prepared for accusations or arguments or demands for additional information. She hadn't been prepared for casual dismissal. "That's it?" "That's it." "You're not going to ask questions?" "I don't need to ask questions. You just answered them." Caspian collected a change of clothes and left Maya to finish preparing for her evening with the man who had excellent taste and expensive opinions. He changed in the guest bathroom and left the house without saying goodbye, driving to the climbing gym where he could focus on problems that had clear solutions. He spent 2 hours working on increasingly difficult routes, pushing himself until his muscles burned and his mind quieted, and the only thing that mattered was the next handhold. Physical exhaustion was a luxury he'd forgotten existed during the months of emotional exhaustion that had characterized his marriage. Maya's car wasn't in the driveway when he returned home at 9:30. Caspian made himself dinner and ate it at their kitchen table while reading architectural journals, enjoying the silence that came from not having to pretend interest in conversations about fictional coworkers and imaginary client emergencies. Maya returned at 11:45, shoes in her hand, hair slightly disheveled, makeup refreshed but not quite perfectly restored. She moved through the kitchen like someone who'd had exactly enough wine to feel confident and not quite enough to forget where she lived. "How was dinner?" Caspian asked from the couch where he'd been reading. "Fine." "Good food?" "Sure." "Good company?" Maya paused at the bottom of the stairs, considering whether to engage or retreat. "Very good company." "I'm glad to hear it." "Are you?" "I'm glad you're being honest." Maya stared at him for a long moment, perhaps realizing that her husband was no longer participating in the elaborate fiction that had sustained their marriage for months. He was acknowledging her affair without condemning it, which was somehow more unsettling than jealousy would have been. "I'm going to bed," she said finally. "Good night." Caspian waited until he heard the bedroom door close before allowing himself to smile. Maya was being forced to confront the reality that her careful deception was unnecessary. He wasn't going to fight for their marriage, or demand explanations, or create dramatic scenes that would give her stories to share with her blue dress consultant. He was simply going to let her make her choices and live with the consequences. The next morning, Maya emerged from the bedroom wearing workout clothes and the kind of determined expression people adopted when they'd made decisions during sleepless nights. "We need to talk," she announced. "Okay." "Not here. Somewhere neutral." "Where did you have in mind?" "That coffee place downtown, the one with the outdoor seating." Caspian agreed to meet her at 2 o'clock, after his morning site visit and before her afternoon meetings with the coworkers who may or may not have actually existed. He spent the intervening hours reviewing structural plans for a mixed-use development, focusing on load-bearing calculations that would determine whether the building could support the weight it was designed to carry. Maya was already seated at a corner table when he arrived, her laptop open and her phone face down beside an untouched latte. She'd chosen a location where they could have a private conversation in a public space, the kind of strategic decision people made when they wanted witnesses to their reasonableness. "Thank you for coming," she said as he sat down. "Of course." "I've been thinking about our situation." "Our situation?" "The way we've been living, like strangers who happen to share an address." Caspian ordered black coffee from the server who appeared with impeccable timing. Maya waited until they were alone again before continuing. "I know you think I'm having an affair. I know you're having an affair." Maya's eyes widened slightly, perhaps surprised by his directness. "You know? I know. How? Does it matter how?" Maya considered this, her fingers drumming against the table in patterns that suggested anxiety or impatience or both. "I suppose it doesn't. So what did you want to talk about?" "I want you to know that it wasn't planned. It just happened. Things don't just happen. People make choices." "You're right." Maya's voice dropped to the register she used for important confessions. I made choices, and now I'm making more choices. Caspian waited. Maya had orchestrated this conversation, and he was curious to see where she intended to take it. I want us to separate, she said finally. Officially, not just financially, but actually separate. Okay. Maya blinked several times, processing his response. You're agreeing? I'm acknowledging your decision. Don't you want to know why? I already know why. Do you want to know about him? No. Maya leaned back in her chair, studying his face like she was trying to read blueprints written in a language she didn't understand. You're not going to fight this. What would I be fighting for? Our marriage, our history, the life we built together. Caspian sipped his coffee, tasting bitterness that had nothing to do with the beans. The life we built together ended months ago. You've been building a different life with someone else. I'm just catching up to your timeline. It doesn't have to end badly. It doesn't have to end at all. But you've decided it should. Maya's phone buzzed against the table. She glanced at the screen and smiled before catching herself and flipping the device face down again. Is that him? Caspian asked. Yes. Does he know you're here with me? Yes. Does he know we're discussing divorce? Maya hesitated. Not exactly. What does he know exactly? He knows we're having problems. He knows we're probably going to separate. He knows you're married. Of course he knows I'm married. Caspian nodded, filing away another piece of information about the man who'd been helping his wife select evening wear and restaurant venues. Maya's boyfriend was comfortable dating a married woman. He was patient enough to wait for her to extract herself from her current situation. He was confident enough to text her while she was having separation conversations with her husband. When? Caspian asked. When what? When do you want to make this official? Maya had clearly prepared for this question. I was thinking we could do a trial separation first. 6 months. See how we feel. I know how I feel. How do you feel? Like I've been married to someone who's been auditioning for a different role for the past 6 months. Maya's phone buzzed again. This time she didn't look at it, but her eyes flickered toward the sound like a reflex she couldn't control. He's waiting for you, Caspian observed. He's being supportive. I'm sure he is. They finished their coffee in silence, both of them understanding that the conversation had served its purpose. Maya had presented her decision as a mutual discussion, but it had been a unilateral announcement delivered with the courtesy of advance notice. I'll find an apartment, she said as they prepared to leave. Take your time. Really? Really? Find something you like, something that feels right. Maya studied his face again, searching for signs of sarcasm or hidden anger. You're being very understanding. I'm being practical. What does that mean? Caspian stood and left enough money on the table to cover both their drinks plus a generous tip. It means I'm not going to make this harder than it needs to be. Maya remained seated, perhaps expecting additional negotiation or emotional processing, or the kind of dramatic relationship conversations that provided closure and clarity. Instead, Caspian kissed the top of her head with the gentle affection of someone saying goodbye to a former version of themselves. Take care of yourself, he said. That's it? That's it. He walked away without looking back, leaving Maya to finish her coffee and respond to her boyfriend's increasingly frequent text messages. In the parking lot, Caspian sat in his truck for several minutes, processing the strange relief that came from finally naming their situation accurately. Maya wanted out. She'd found someone who made her laugh the way she used to laugh with Caspian. She was ready to start over with a man who appreciated blue dresses and had opinions about restaurant terraces and texted during important conversations because he couldn't wait to hear from her. Caspian started his engine and drove back to the job site where concrete problems had concrete solutions and structural integrity could be measured with precision instruments. His marriage was officially ending, but for the first time in months, he felt like he was building something instead of watching it deteriorate. The framework Marcus had helped him design was working exactly as intended. Maya was making her choice, and Caspian was making his. Both of them were choosing honesty over performance, which felt like the first genuine agreement they'd reached in years. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.